Hey, good morning, everybody. Thank you for participating in EDR from AFAR. The people on here are folks that we typically get to see in Hilton Head, which is, we're doing virtual Hilton Head shirt with the palmettos. I first wanted to thank our leadership. I know my chairman is on this program, Mr. Bob Pauling, and several of our cooperative CEOs are here. Without them and their support, the things that we do to partner with you and your communities just would not be possible. And we've been immensely blessed by their leadership. I want to tell you that our team misses you. We have missed the opportunity to be with you, not just in Hilton Head, but in all the things that we do this time of year. And so this gives us a way to connect with you, even if it's virtually. I wanted to tell you that if you have questions, instead of texting me, there's a dialog box at the bottom of your screen for Q&A. You can also raise your hand, like Sandy is right now. Raise your hand and I'll click on your microphone and unmute you so that you can ask your question, and I'll try to keep tabs on all of that as we go along. I want to introduce you to our speaker today. So Pete Mento was supposed to be with us in Hilton Head. And I would tell you then, not knowing what we know now, the feedback that we have gotten from Jamie Frost on my team and Warren and Jason is that it was very incredibly entertaining, but very sobering. And I think what we're going to talk to you about today is not hopefully what you want to hear, but it's what we all need to hear. And as we start looking towards where we go from all of this. Pete Mento is VP of Global Trade and Managed Services for Crane Worldwide.
Oh, not anymore. I'm not.
Oh, is that pulled from your old bio?
Yeah, it's fine. I'm the managing director of customs and duties at Crowe. I've been that way for 8 months, but it's okay, man. I changed jobs like my ex-wife changes handbags, so it's all good.
All right. Well, this stuff is all permanent stuff that I'll read next. He's a foreign relations expert. He's a lobbyist, trade academic. He's a comedian. You'll see some of that today. He's a Harvard alum, degree in government and trade policy, PhD from the University of Durham in UK. He has a unique background in economics, customs regulations, and trade law. Pete, thank you for being with us, brother. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you. I'm going to mute myself, take myself off camera, and monitor things on this end.
Great. So can everyone see my slides okay? Is this the right way? Just want to make sure that, I don't know, James, is this coming across so you can see my...
Yeah, you're good.
Excellent. Okay, so I do a lot of WebExes, so I feel relatively comfortable. I'm going to admit a couple of things. So this is the first time I've shaved in probably a week and a half. When you're a guy with a beard, that means I've done the cheek and neck area so that I don't have the caveman look. So you gave me an excuse to tidy myself up a bit today. So I want to thank you all for that.
You look good.
Thank you. Thank you very much. And second of all, I am wearing trousers, for those of you who are wondering, but I am not wearing shoes. So let's just get it all out in the open. I have taken this opportunity to give a very dense, in-depth, but humorous talk on trade and economics, sans shoes. So although we're not in Hilton Head, I brought a little bit of the Hilton Head vibe with me today in New Hampshire. I would normally be giving a speech like this from my office on Pennsylvania Avenue in DC, but I'm in my apartment in Manchester, New Hampshire. It's beautiful today. And the reason I'm up here is my daughter, who is 14 years old now, lives in New England, and I wanted to be closer to her while this was going on. I did stay in DC for my clients for the most part up until about a week and a half ago. So I have very prescient, very present information that I can share with you. And it's funny that some of the people on today heard me speak in South Carolina really at the beginning of this crisis, when it first started to roll in China, and I was kind of Dr. Doom and Gloom. I wouldn't shake hands. I sequestered myself from everyone. So when I showed up, I kept myself in my hotel room. There's a big part of my world has been talking about bioterror and talking about worst case scenarios. And I felt like this might be the one. And I don't know if I really was or not, but think about that for a second. I'm telling you that this probably wasn't the big one. And look at what it's done to our economy. So we're going to talk a lot today about a couple of different factors. We're going to talk about the current geopolitical state of the world and what that has to do with trade and transportation. We're going to have a chat about the different major trade issues that are happening right now and how those have a knock-on effect onto the global economy and why that matters. And then just because it is the biggest news story in years, we're going to talk about this coronavirus and COVID-19 and what that's going to mean for politics, what that's going to most likely mean for global trade, and what it's certainly going to mean for transportation and getting goods across borders, probably for the next 10 to 20 years, and why we ought to care. So there is a means for asking questions. There's a Q&A tab in the Zoom arena, which you'll see up top there, the Q&A bubble. That's probably easier to ask questions in than using the chat function. The chat function is probably better for technical stuff. And that's it. So like Marvin Gaye said, let's get it on. We might as well start having some fun here. So I have 2 homes that I spend most of my time in up here in New Hampshire. And then I have another in New Orleans. I am a proud New Orleanian. I ride Endymion every year during Fat Tuesday or the Saturday before Fat Tuesday. And I haven't missed a Mardi Gras in a very, very long time. It's my happy place. And, you know, when Katrina happened, it said a lot about the state of how most people deal with scary, bad things. I've generally found that there are 2 types of people in the world. And it gets back to a conversation that my grandfather had with me when I was very young. He said, in any bad situation, there's 2 types of country boys. There's the ones that want to talk about it and the ones that want to fight. He said, there's the guys that are going to get into an argument and the ones that are just going to punch you in the face. You kind of want the guys that are going to want to just punch somebody in the face in your pickup, buddy. I left to go to New Orleans days after Katrina ended. And when I got there, I went down to an old football field where when I was younger, I spent a lot of time, and written on the side of the field house in spray paint, it said, "Hope is not a plan." And I began to see this written all over the city of New Orleans days after they started letting people back in to deal with the after effects of Katrina. Hope is not a plan. Hope is not a strategy. Hope is not the answer. We need more than hope. And I've kind of turned that into a more personal catchphrase. Hope is not a strategy. You know, we always hoped that the big storm wouldn't hit New Orleans. We always hoped that before it did, it would turn and go into the Gulf. We always hoped that if the big storm did hit the city, that the levees wouldn't break. We always hoped that if the levees break, the city wouldn't flood. We always hoped that if the city flooded, that, you know, people would get out in time. We always hoped that if they couldn't get out in time, there'd be a safe place for them to wait it out. And then we hoped that people wouldn't die. And then we always hoped that the federal government would come in and they would just clean everything up. Hope did not work. Hope was not a strategy. To this day, I can take you to parts of the city that have never recovered. And there are just study after study that I can show you done by fiercely strong academics that can point out how the socioeconomic situation of that whole state has forever changed because of that one storm. Hope is not a viable way to deal with pending problems. Hope is not a way to manage likely problems. And we have known that things like pandemics were reasonably likely. We've known for a very long time. There was a Pentagon paper that was released last week. It was finally declassified from 2003. You can all read it if you'd like. It's on Scribd right now if you want to read it. It goes all the way back to the second Bush administration that talks about our need for more equipment, more PPE, being more vigilant in our supply chains, and how such a thing could affect any economy, let alone ours. Hope is not a strategy. And as I look around right now, I warned a little over a month ago that for most people, they run their supply chains based on the idea that if something tiny were to be thrown into it, they hope that it's resilient enough to be managed through it. And now we find ourselves on the outside looking in, hopeful that it's good enough to get started again, hopeful that our clients will still be there, hopeful that our vendors can manage a return. And I don't want to sit here and be all miserable the entire time, because there's good news as well. My first piece of advice to everyone is to stop watching the news with a rabid fascination. You shouldn't treat any news program as entertainment. It's not what it's there for. Inform yourself and walk away. And I am definitely the last person that should be saying that to anybody, but you'll make yourself crazy if you don't. Our entire year is being redefined right now as folks involved in international trade, because 2019 and 2020 are going to be forever memorialized as the years that everything that we've done failed. As supply chain professionals, as trade professionals, what we built, this amazing machine, and it really is amazing. It's incredible. My daughter has no idea what I do for a living. If you sat her down and said, "What does your dad do?" She'd say, "I don't know. He talks on the internet and talks about taxes all day. I don't know what he does." The reality is that all of us manage the very intricate movement. All of us in this business manage the very intricate movement of goods from foreign countries across vast, violent oceans for the ease of consumption. You know, we manage the production of goods, the building of factories. We manage transportation infrastructure and banks. This is an incredible network, a complex, difficult network set up for commerce. And it's tight, and it's efficient, and it's streamlined, but it failed. It failed to a degree in that a tariff war created an unforeseen increase in cost because we were over-reliant on one particular area for production. It failed to an extent because it was over-reliant on a transportation infrastructure that to some degree was antiquated, but we were so used to using it, we were over-reliant on it. And geopolitics took a new center stage in a way that none of us were really expecting. I can't imagine that anyone thought that trade and certainly tariffs would be as important as they were in 2020. You know, tariffs were a weapon of geopolitical means back in the 1950s and 1940s. They weren't so important now. What's scariest to me is understanding that so many people that I work with, so many very, very good companies full of geniuses, very smart people, did not have a plan B. They didn't have an alternate means for delivering what they needed. They had never stress tested their supply chain. Whether it was for an unforeseen force majeure, as it were, or whether it was because of a political disagreement between two of the largest economies in the world. They had never kept an alternate means of dealing with production. And what's really sad is because this was the year that a lot of people have lost their jobs because they weren't expecting a pending disaster. So we're going to have to look at everything now from a bunch of different angles. And if we don't look at it from a bunch of different angles, we're really not doing our jobs. And we're doing a disservice to the people who rely on us. So much of business is going to be changed forever because of the last 24 months. And it's not just this nastiness of the COVID virus. It's just as much about the geopolitics that I was asked to speak about firstly months ago, before this was the only thing that anyone talked about on the blasted news. Right. So what were the factors to this fall? What was it that ended up driving us all mad to begin with? Well, it starts with multiple global trade wars all happening at once. It was this reassertion of the idea that a massive economy like ours, so take into accountability that the U.S. economy is the biggest economy in the world. Nothing even comes close. There's There's this mystifyingly naive notion that China's economy is more important than the American economy. That could not be more ridiculous if it tried. America's economy is by far the world's largest and most important because we consume wildly and with abandon. If you took every credit card in America and stacked them on top of each other, they would go 123 miles into space. And that's fact. The typical American household that puts someone into college will take on another $123,000 to $143,000 in debt during the 4-year term of that college education. That's madness. We are, as a general rule, we do 18 to 21% of our consumer spending from Thanksgiving until Christmas Eve. We are a consumption economy, and it is our consumption. It is our consumption of goods that drives the global economy around the world. We are the never-ending gluttonous consumer of the producers of the rest of the world, which is why, and no one's talking about this virus should be terrifying from a geopolitical standpoint. We are able to dump trillions of dollars into our economy. We have the means to do it. We have all kinds of very interesting monetary devices that we can do this with. We can raise taxes. We have ways of gathering the money to do it. Whether or not we can argue about that politically is for another conversation for another day. Imagine if you're a smaller country with a smaller economic basis that is unable to manage the virus, first of all, and second of all, rebuild your economy. Think about that for a minute. And we're going to go to some slides here in a moment. This spread of this virus is not done globally by any stretch of the imagination. We may hit a peak and there could be a drop off. What happens to these smaller economies who feed the demand of the US consumer? We have just gone a month, and it will be longer, where our consumption has not been up to the global need. It is our consumption of their exports that create their jobs. And it's their jobs that create the demand for our exports. It's a never-ending cycle. And that cycle is being, for the most part, neglected at the moment. And the loss of that for a few months is detrimental to the global economy. So our new economy isn't so much about production or consumption. It's more about ideas. And we'll talk more about that in a minute. And this erosion that's currently happening to the global transportation market cannot be spoken about enough. We can't spend enough time talking about this. When I was younger and I went to a merchant marine academy, I was going to drive ships for a living, which should terrify all of you. I was awful at it. I managed to get a Coast Guard license. They were going to have me out driving big, massive container ships, which would have been a crime against humanity, but I was going to do it. I did it for a short time. And, being out there and doing that, there were the good old days when most transportation was still done by hand, when people were load planning using a calculator and graph paper. We had very simple rudimentary computers that were mostly run on arithmetic, helping us to determine load plans for stability on container ships and cargo ships. Now, I remember watching a container of spices being loaded as a young man, and a guy had a chalkboard to determine exactly where each part of the cargo was going to go in to get the maximum stowage on this 40-footer. They had all the different customers for a consolidated container, and they were doing the math, the geometry on the math with a piece of chalk on a chalkboard in Hong Kong to figure out exactly how it was all going to go in there. I was fascinated. I was also a very bored young man, but to me, this was incredible. I couldn't get enough of it. So I look at it now, and it's all computer driven for the maximum efficiency. It is driving down as much information as possible into this simple data summation to get the lowest possible cost and maximum efficiency. It is taking as much value as we possibly can from the relationship of the transportation provider and putting it into these systems. And I would argue, I would submit to you that we are creating a system of logistics providers devoid of much value, that consumers are demanding the lowest possible cost, and they are giving up value along with that and putting the value into software, which is fascinating. This software is becoming extremely powerful, and it's becoming the inventory of the transportation consumer. You're going to have fewer and fewer logistics providers. And I'm not teaching macroeconomics right now. I could, if you guys want to be so bored. For those of you who are having a hard time sleeping at night, like I am, I will put you all to sleep right now with a macro 101 class, I promise. But as supply diminishes, meaning the number of logistics providers diminishes, but demand increases or stays the same, prices go up. So what you're going to see is fewer and fewer container lines, fewer and fewer logistics providers able to give the service that you demand, but consumer demand being driven up and prices increasing. That's what eventually is going to happen. You're going to have software to manage it. It's going to be awful. We had a global virus at the worst possible time for the second most important economy in the world. Cannot overstate, all of these conspiracy theories. I want you to imagine being a guy who has one of his best friends. So I'm the worst possible person on the world that you could possibly date for a number of reasons. I mean, let's face it. Okay, I'm so attractive that it's difficult to look at me. I understand. You're welcome, ladies. You're welcome. And I'm funny. All those things put together. I am also a overweight, pear-shaped, balding, middle-aged economist. Let's just be honest, okay? My idea of a good time is like running regression tables. I am miserably boring. One of my closest friends is this extremely attractive, super interesting artist. And his favorite thing to do is read about these conspiracy theories, and he has convinced himself that China did all of this on purpose. I can tell you from the logic-based, incredibly boring person that I am, that it's simply the country who is poised to lose the most out of this global crisis, unfortunately, is China. And let me tell you why. Leading up until this awful virus came out, China's economy was suffering mightily. The lackluster economic outcomes of well over a year of suffering through difficulties in exporting around the world, and elongated, vicious fight over a trade deal, which finally reached a phase one. Think about that. We finally got to a phase one in the fall, and then bam, this virus happens. And the world's global economy kind of went into, down about 5 gears. They are facing a debt crisis already. They have a real problem now maintaining global market share because the rest of the world has seen an opportunity to purchase goods from other countries at the same quality and cost. This could not have happened at a worse time for the Chinese exporter. It also couldn't have happened at a worse time for the US consumer. The ability for the American consumer to get what they want when they want it has become normalized. We don't, as American consumers, really look at the country of origin of the things that we buy like we used to. When I was a young man, I remember vividly, my grandparents on both sides of my family always looking at the country of origin tabs on clothes, always being very proud of the fact that their cars were made in America, chastising friends of theirs for letting their children buy Japanese cars. Now we equate quality with the brand name of the product rather than the country of origin of the product. This is a massive shift in consumer sentiment. So China had moved away from that. We didn't really consider made in China to be part of anything other than just the production cycle. And now they've allowed other countries to step up in that. And if it's made with the same quality and the same consistency, it doesn't matter where it's made. It's the brand that dictates quality, not the country of origin. And then lastly, Brexit, which we'll talk about lastly when we get to this here. So pretty sure I've got till what, 2 o'clock this afternoon? How much time do I have here? Yeah.
Till 10.
Yeah. I'll be good.
Well, we're at 10:15. We were scheduled till 10:30, but we want to leave time for questions.
Questions. Come on now. I'll be so concise. This is filled to the brim with cold brew, by the way. I am living on fear and caffeine right now. There's nothing else in between. And I quit drinking every year for Lent. I want you to imagine, of all the years that I've given up drinking, this has absolutely been the worst. I have been stuck and sequestered sober for all of this. This is one of the stranger things that you're going to have to get your head around today in order for you to really understand the global economy and politics right now. And this is a super important concept. All right. So take a moment, take a deep breath. When I teach this to graduate students, I honestly, I take a week just to go over this one concept, but you're all adults. So not that they're not adults, but most of them honestly come to class high. So let's just get that out of the way. But just take a couple of seconds to really consider this. Products don't really matter anymore in the new economy. Ideas matter. They matter so much that our country was willing to put our entire economy on the line. We put our entire economy in global jeopardy. We were willing to put everything that we had built up on the line to prove this point, and we won. Well, I don't want to say we won. We won a battle. We haven't won a war. When this country first started, we were a colonized state of the British Empire, of the French Empire, Dutch to some degree, I suppose, Spanish. But we evolved into an agrarian state. That agrarian state turned into a mechanized economy, an industrial economy, which is the one that we are most famous for because we became an industrialized state that also had this spark of engineering based on amazing invention. And then after World War II, we were really the only country left that had the means to produce because no one had bombed us, bombed the bejesus out of us. And we had the world's only fully intact merchant marine. We had an incredible infrastructure for banking. We rebuilt the world's economy in the 1950s and the 1960s. It was an incredible thing. Someday, maybe another 30, 40 years from now, I think you're going to see people really put a lot of work into understanding the importance of the American economy, post-World War II, probably up until the Carter administration, why it was so important and the follow-on effects of that. All right. So the next economy that happened was the service economy, which I follow into the workplace into, and a lot of you on the phone probably follow into, where we take jobs in finance, economics, banking, software development, engineering, sales, just sales, distribution, importing and exporting of products, and then we get involved in the management of that, architecture. The case that it goes on. And then also these incredible developments happen in the meantime of the micronization of computer processing, this incredible telecommunications revolution that America heads, and the internet, and this entire economy based on data. And then bam, this new economy that's happening now, which is just based entirely on ideas. We are the world's first innovation economy in America. No one is even close to us. Nobody. No one here on the phone today can name me your favorite Chinese name brand product. So we're not saying Apple. No. Apple's an American company who makes their products in China. There's Huawei, Huawei phones, but really no one really buys them in America. There's certainly Jingdao. There's Lenovo. That's a fantastic Chinese company, but not a lot of Chinese companies that we all think of on a day-to-day basis. To prove my point, I always say to people, would you rather own a share of Foxconn that makes the Apple products, or of Apple, who comes up with the Apple concepts and could move the production of that product anywhere? The idea is the resource now. And these ideas are so important that we're willing to weaponize tariffs and to go into very dangerous wars in order to protect them. Wars used to be fought on the ground, over ground. We used to get into wars and sacrifice the lives of our young men and women in order to say, that piece of dirt and its resources, I want it. And now we're fighting wars over data. We're fighting wars over ideas, and we're fighting wars on being able to control them and what they could control. If you don't believe me, simply look at where aerospace is going and space exploration is going and how incredibly tightly controlled that technology and the ideas behind it are. So this trade war that we went into with China, it was entirely based on the protection of ideas. There were follow-on effects of making sure that we exported more to China, yes, of course, and trying to make China a more fair trading partner. But most of this trade war was about trying to get China to stop stealing global ideas. China is at a point now where they had hoped, at least by 2025, to no longer be dependent on anyone else's ideas, concepts, products, or raw materials. They wanted to be in a position where they could be fully independent. Through the course of that desire for independence, they've done a significant amount of intellectual property theft. Supposedly, allegedly. And many of us have seen the proof of that, so we can argue about it. So we're at a point now where an agreement was signed on the 15th. That deal came to fruition. They agreed upon it the fall of last year. It doesn't cover a lot of important things. We'll get into what it does cover in a moment, but it didn't address hacking. A lot of the ideas that China has managed to steal, allegedly, they've stolen allegedly through hacking. So imagine you're a great idea company and, some hacker at a coffee shop with a laptop breaks through your firewalls and steals your ideas and then distributes them through companies that are mostly backed by the Chinese Communist Party. And all that money you've spent on research is now, doesn't matter. Someone else just makes the thing that you came up with. It doesn't stop them from all of these really intricate means that they've set up of distributing money, government money to companies to help them grow quickly. The tariffs that were put in place are still there. So the 301 tariffs are still there. The 232 tariffs are still there. But the big list, the scary list on retail goods, the 4B list tariffs didn't go into effect. So, sneakers and retail goods, that didn't happen. But the 4A tariffs did go into effect. They went from 15% to 7.5%. And all those old 301 tariffs are all still there. The reason they're still there is because we wanted to make sure China adhered to the agreement. So as China does the things they promised, which we'll get into in a moment, those tariffs will go away. So one of the longstanding concerns is the theft of intellectual property rights. So China has promised to enforce those intellectual property rights and trademarks. An interesting spin-off of this is that China is going to be taking a very strong hand in enforcing the exports of stolen intellectual property rights. So this idea of copy merchandise, fraudulent copy merchandise, of knockoffs, they're going to get very forceful on the stopping the exportation of those things out of China. So that'll be an interesting thing to see how they manage to do it and just how hard they get after it. We were concerned about trade secrets in pharmaceuticals as an example, and I guess they're going to have a pretty heavy hand on stopping that kind of thing. Another big area is makeup and makeup products. Technology transfer. If you open a business in China, they force you to bring on a Chinese joint venture. That's ending. So now you don't have to do it. You can tell China you don't want to do it, and the Chinese companies will not be forced into a joint venture with you. So this is pretty big because a lot of that information was being stolen by Chinese companies because they were in a forced joint venture with you. So this is a huge win, probably the most important one actually. Financial companies can now work in China. This is another big win. If you go to China and you try to use their version of Uber, You can't use an American credit card. You have to use a Chinese banking facility. So that's all changing. And then American service firms can also give advice now to Chinese companies, which is a pretty big deal. This is a major win. So Chinese individuals can now purchase their financial advice from American firms. This one I don't know if I buy. So I'm not sold this one's going to happen. China for years has been a currency manipulator, like forever. Whenever things have gotten bad in China, they've just dropped the value of their currency against the US dollar, which makes their exports cheaper. So under this agreement, they're promising not to do that anymore. Well, anytime their economy gets super bad, like it's about to be, this is the first thing that they would do to manage it. And I've got a hard time believing that if Mr. Ping called Mr. Trump and said, I'm in a really bad spot and I've got to do something, and manipulating my currency is the fastest way to do it, I've got a hard time believing they couldn't come to some agreement. So I'm watching this one pretty closely. The expansion of trade is massive. They promised about $200 billion in the first 2 years, so another $100 billion or more of exported trade per year. It's apparently closer to about $260 billion. So figure $130 billion a year of everything from frozen pork and chicken and beef to corn and wheat and rice. We're exporting rice to China, which I think is hysterical. Financial services, technology, automobiles, aircraft. So we're really doing a lot to cut into the trade deficit with this country that we've had for a very long time. This is a massive, massive win for the U.S. economy. Dispute resolution, we didn't get what we wanted. We wanted a tribunal made up of a number of different countries and China and the U.S. to say that someone has been stealing our ideas. Instead, China has set up a court. They've made it very clear that they're going to have an effective internal way of dealing with these disputes. I'll see how that goes. I have a feeling that this probably in the long run isn't going to be good enough, but we'll see. Overall, the trade war was pretty brutal on the U.S. economy. So depending on who you talk to, it probably retarded growth in the U.S. anywhere from 0.5% to 1.1% growth. That's a lot. If you think about how hot the U.S. economy has been, that's a pretty rough number. About $65 billion additional costs have hit the American consumer. So it hit, products that were manufactured, and then it caused inflated costs down the line of the supply chain. And it hit China bad because a lot of American companies said, rather than deal with these tariffs, I'm just going to send my production to other countries. And all those other countries that won were Malaysia, Indonesia, but Mexico won huge. Mexico's exports to the U.S. rose significantly because of this argument. And with USMCA, they'll continue to go up. We got what we wanted, which is what scares me. We'll probably do it again. So I think that this is going to be the new normal. It was always the left-hand side of politics. It was always the more liberal side of politics that always said they wanted to do this, but it was a Republican with a Republican Senate that pushed it. So I wouldn't be surprised if this became the new normal. And we're already doing it again. I mean, we're all over Europe. We have all these new tariffs on European goods, and we're threatening more because they're not playing along with our ideas with regards to trade. I mean, we're at it again. We're like, hey, the last time we fought this way, we won. So let's keep fighting this way. We started a trade war with Japan. We got a free trade agreement with them. We started a trade war with Europe. We started a trade war with India. And looks like we're going to get what we wanted of them. We started with Mexico and Canada. Renegotiated USMCA. It's like my kid when she was little, screamed loud enough, she got more juice. What do you want, So, and that leads us to an interesting question about the election. There was a very vocal primary season, which of course ended yesterday, for all intents and purposes ended yesterday, when Mr. Biden became kind of the only person running for the Democratic election. And up until that point, I defy you. I defy you to find a lot of rhetoric about the trade war. You won't. Most of the people running for the nomination on the Democratic Party kept their mouth shut about it because, in effect, they agreed with it. So I don't really think it matters who gets elected. I think that this stuff carries on. I think the question is would a Democratic president be as likely to be as vocal and as steadfast in their arguments to maintain sort of like, our feet ground in the ground to keep the argument, to maintain this argument with China as Mr. Trump has been? I'm not sure. So, but never forget that labor is a big fan of tariffs in order to protect jobs in America. So the USMCA, the new NAFTA, as I just keep calling it because I cannot get used to calling it USMCA, it appears that it's going to keep rolling on. US-Japan is cleared and ready to rock and roll. America apparently wants to get re-engaged in the Trans-Pacific, the TTP, which I think is good news. And the ultimate hope of this argument with China is to eventually get to a US-Chinese free trade agreement covering part of the tariff. I would expect mostly agriculture and automotive. So big things are doing. And whichever one of these people becomes president, I think you're going to see this is still in the news. I think you're going to see that it's still being argued. It's just a question of how it's settled. Right. So big news of the day. When I gave a similar speech to this in South Carolina, and see, it was March the 6th was the last time when I pulled this up. This is what the map looked like. You can see America there on the left. This is the exact same slide that I used. We had 101 confirmed total global cases, 3,400 deaths, and 55,000 people had recovered. Of course, the very fascinating algorithmic map on the right. And then this was from this morning, 1.4, quickly approaching 1.5 million deaths. All these statistics, of course, have to be taken with a grain of salt. When you live in math for a living like I do, you always have to keep that in mind. This is people that have been tested. These are, who knows how many deaths happen within it, without it. And also I put absolutely no credence whatsoever in the numbers from China. Absolutely none. So the, just to go back, this has been a little over a month in between the two. So 101,490 to 1.4 million, deaths of 3,460 to 89,435. And as troubling as those numbers are, and as statistically uncomfortable as I'm sure they make us all, I can't sit here all day with you and talk about the growth and the spread of it, because that's not what I do for a living. What I can do is I can talk to you about how it's likely going to affect supply chains, global trade, and politics, though. I do feel confident talking about that. I think we're all about to have we always used to watch films in football in high school, and we did it on Monday afternoon after practice. And my football coach in high school was painfully honest with us. And he would say the most brutal things about our performance. So I'm going to tell you right now, we're about to find out whether or not the e-commerce revolution that we had been promised was effective. And there's going to be a psychological shift, I think, about retail that's happened. For many Americans, at least, this may have been that moment, that Rubicon, where we changed our attitude about online purchasing forever. It's never going to be the same again. Where we began to realize just how little we have to go to a store in order to maintain our life. And whether or not the supply chain that we built around it remained resilient enough to manage it, and what a traditional concept of resiliency was. And I believe that our political infrastructure is going to have to step up to support and manage that new reality. And in the wake of that, there are going to be new attitudes towards real estate, new attitudes towards finance, new attitudes towards banking, to be sure. It's a fascinating thing to have to think about in its earliest stages now. But what just happened is going to change the way that we spend money forever. I believe also that we're going to have a different attitude about partnerships between the government and industry. You saw what happened when the federal government, when the White House in particular, began negotiating with American companies to become active members of the fight. And it turned into truly a negotiation. You had a government that was relatively unwilling to force the issue, and you had an industry side of it that really didn't want to be put in a position to lose money and or whatever the case may be. They didn't want to be in a negative financial position. Who would be, right? So I think you're going to see a growing, a creative attitude toward how can we build something for the future that is collaborative between government and industry to manage this going forward? And what will that political private attitude look like so that we don't have these lagged substantial problems in the future? We can take quicker action on these problems. I fully believe, after a number of conversations I've had recently, there was this idea kicking around that we need a sixth branch of the military. I thought this was fascinating. A reserve corps of medical professionals, of paramedical professionals, of individuals who are taught in the basics of medicine for pandemics. I thought this was fascinating. So you would take young men and women and you would teach them the basics of emergency medicine after high school, and you would have them constantly update those basics once a month, as like a reservist would, and then for a couple of weeks every year, and they would have the same benefits as a veteran. They would wear a uniform. They would work for the state that they live in, and they would have benefits towards college. I mean, it was a fascinating idea. And then when a pandemic or a medical emergency or a natural disaster happened, they would be available to help people. I thought that was an incredibly good idea. So is it time to do something like that, to have individuals ready for the next time that there's an issue? There's another stimulus bill that's being argued right now, as all of you are probably well aware. And a part of this is towards the use of the stimulus bill towards infrastructure. The more you read about it, the less it appears towards transportation infrastructure, which would have been nice, bridges, roads, and probably more towards greater infrastructure, things like energy infrastructure, as an example. There will certainly be things in there for green energy. There will certainly be things in there for power grids, water infrastructure, and the such. So how much of that will be towards badly needed bridge improvements, badly needed road improvements, dealing with congestion and getting logistics upgraded? The third part's the one that I'm not hearing a lot about yet, but this is the one that I'm telling you all right now. If you could bet on this, like if there was something on DraftKings.com or MyBookie.com, I would bury the house on this. You are going to have extreme pressures from three particular groups on making sure that you have a plan on this. One is going to be from investors. It's going to be common now for investors to look through 10Ks and to have expectations of audits that have a plan. Companies have a plan to address something like this in the future for resiliency against natural disasters. And like it's going to be in there. Customers are going to act differently with regards to how they shop. And I have a feeling that it's going to go back to the way it was with certainly my grandparents and definitely my parents, where we had a cupboard stocked. We did not, our attitude toward shopping was very different than it was now. And then lastly, I think that boards of directors are going to come down extremely hard on companies that did not have a plan B, and they're going to come down very hard on companies to establish a plan B. I added some things about that. I know I'm running out of time, but I added some things about that because I think it's important. Yeah, sorry. What's that?
You're good. You're good.
I'm good. Okay. You know, I look at the communities that were hit with this, and I talked to one of my partners, probably my favorite partner yesterday, Will Niblo. Well, I mean, other than my boss, I love my boss, but Will yesterday, and this is something that we decided we're going to start preaching. So you have to excuse me if I have any typos on these next two PowerPoint slides because they're brand new. But what we're telling people is you should probably do some supply chain triage. So take a look at how your goods came into the world, right, over the course of this disaster, and take a look at kind of what went wrong. You know, I think it's extremely important that we have a kind eye towards the mistakes that just happened. The natural, I sound like such a consultant right now, and I apologize to everyone because I hate it when consultants talk, and I sound like one right now. The natural attitude post something bad going on is to just immediately find out whose fault it was and then light them on fire, you know? This is not the time to do that. It's certainly not the time right now. We need to understand what the factors were that led to failures in our ability to support our customers, ourselves, and one another. And then see if there's something we could have done to make that less likely to have happened. And then how reasonable it is to expect that we would be able to create a process or build a relationship to manage that so that we don't have to deal with it next time. We need to preserve working capital. I really believe that this economy is going to recover, and it's going to recover almost as quickly and as acutely as it fell apart. We just found out, 6 million more people are out of jobs. And it's really sobering every time you hear those numbers. It just seems almost, unfathomable when you consider that there's at least 12 million people now that are out of work. But what I will tell you is, if you look at where the economy is today, we are basically where we were about when the last presidential election cycle transited. So we've lost most of the gains of the past 3.5 years, which is not insurmountable to recover. Many of those jobs were in areas like transportation, service, food service, retail, and one would hope that when we're able to go out and access the world again, that we can get them back. At least I hope so. But capital and being able to find places where we haven't been as smart with our money as we probably should have been, that needs to be a key concern as quickly as you can. Take a new eye towards how you spend your money. Look at things like your contracts. Try to understand where you have opportunities for recovery. Look at your taxes, look at your duties, look at your tariffs, of course. And try to be smart about recovery there. Strategic sourcing. Have you ever thought about where else you could buy your goods? And have you considered maybe keeping a couple of those vendors on the leash, right? So a couple of times a year, buying from those vendors, buying a strategic amounts. They're constantly able to bring stuff to you in case you need them. So there's always another basis for you to get your things from them. And then a resiliency policy. Take this strategic view towards how you bring in your products, and then having this sustainability attitude about crisis management. There are political upheavals, there are currency crises, there are transportation issues that go on. So have that attitude toward it, and then build a plan around it, a realistic plan around it, so that you can manage these problems going forward. I'll make these slides available to everyone so that you can have a copy of them. I certainly don't want to make everyone sit here and try to write them all
also
down.
Videoing.
Cool.
So
yeah.
It'll be available.
Yeah. So, deeper into all of these different areas, I certainly don't think you should start it right now. There's way too much cool new stuff to watch on Netflix for you to get too deep into all of this. For those of you who like Tiger King, do yourself a favor, and on Amazon Prime, you need to watch The Wonderful Whites of West Virginia. It'll make Tiger King look like Leave It to Beaver. Just trust your Uncle Pete on that. But when you do have time to begin to manage all this, take them one at a time. Take them one at a time, and build a functional team that can look at these and really attack it. For supply chain triage, create a team that has the power to make change. Because if you don't have people that can actually manage the change, then it was kind of worthless, wasn't it? Establish KPIs that you can look at and measure success. Because if you're not, there's no point to it. It constantly drives this thing. Meet once a month and say, here's little things that we saw in our supply chain. We can probably do better. We're making some changes. Here's how it's affecting it. On that working capital piece, you should be able to pretty quickly find ways to bring some cash back into the coffers. I've never met a company that didn't have some inefficiencies that they could put some work into it. It's very important you have non-accounting, non-finance people in this, because someone has to be able to say the things you're proposing aren't good for business. Sorry, it's not right for our customers. It's not right for the people who work here. This is about quality of service. It's about quality of life for the people who work here. So it's important that you have a pretty diverse team there. And then strategic sourcing, this is harder than it sounds. So it's important to maybe even include your vendors in this and to say to them, you guys rock it for us in China. This isn't about punishing you. This is about trying to find ways for us to be more resilient. Are there other places that you produce that you and I could talk about maybe having as a relief valve in case we have a problem in the future? Because that saved a lot of companies this time. And then deeper into the resiliency, how do we sustain risk management going forward? This idea of contingency plans, documenting them is so important. And I know it's boring. I know it's a pain, but having people that manage it and documenting it means that when some headhunter calls you and gives you a much better job, you don't have to feel guilty about leaving all that work you've done because it's going to live on past you, which is a lot nicer than saying that when someone gets hit by a bus, the idea still lives beyond it, right? Okay, last concept for today. I can't change anything that's already happened, but I can put you in a position to be more successful with Brexit. Prime Minister Johnson apparently is recovering from his COVID-19 nightmare. Regardless, Brexit is apparently going to happen. It's not done, but the roadmap to its conclusion, we are definitely in the final episode of the last season here, kids. So they expect to have something done by December 31st of 2020. And the UK and the EU are working out that final detail of what it's going to look like. They're trying to come up with a trade agreement, some sort of a customs union. It's going to be hard to do that with the world in turmoil. And there doesn't appear to be any reasonable way for them to get an extension. But I still believe there will be some kind of a trade union between these two. Even with a trade union, it doesn't mean things will be tariff-free. The size of this, how massive it is, I cannot overstate it. So 45% of all the exports out of the UK go to the European Union. If this happens, there's going to be about 350 to 400 million new customs entries created. That's a lot of new work. A lot of costs that are associated with that. And what you need to do if you're doing business in this part of the world is understand how it affects your transfer pricing. So has someone from tax really done the work to understand that? Understand how it's going to affect how you manage your value-added tax and VAT, how it's going to affect your duty spend and your supply chain. If you haven't done this work already, you have time to get it done. You don't have a lot of time. And it's not even that much work. Like, it's a couple of weeks of paying attention to this while you do other things. But I would want to be in a position where I could say to my board of directors, yes, we understood what our options were. We took option C out of options A, B, C, and D, because this seemed the one that was the most prosperous for us, the most reasonable. So I would highly suggest putting some work in on that one, because I wouldn't want to be the CEO that didn't have a plan B for this stuff. There's an amazing opportunity right now to bring all kinds of different parts of your businesses together and make up a plan and begin to work as one unit. And, you know, bring in legal, bring in government affairs and have them work as one, because there's a lot you can do to mitigate the burden. I don't feel like our jobs as trade professionals have ever mattered more. So begin to value that and begin to use it internally. And before I take questions, you know, the last thing I want to say is every leader in the world right now is focused on two things: the survival of their constituents and looking for ways to maintain their sovereignty and the safety of their people while also cooperating. And if you don't believe that, I can give you countless examples of how people all over the world are trying to make it safer. And I mean that. I've seen it firsthand. There is something incredible about a world in crisis, and that we all try to find ways to look for a way to help others, because it makes us think less of what we're going through. And that can be said the same for nation states. Amongst all of this chaos, globally, from a geopolitical standpoint, there is a tremendous amount of cooperation. I wish there was more between the US and China, but you can't get everything you want. So in the coming year with this American election, this virus has done a lot to slow down the progress between the US and China. But I don't believe that an American election is going to change the argumentative nature of our relationship. I think what it will do is slow down the arguing. I also believe that in the coming year, you're probably going to see some pretty nasty rhetoric between the US and Europe, regardless of a virus or not. And that's going to probably manifest itself in more tariffs between the two countries and a lack of cooperation. Where I do see glimmers of hope is between the United States and South America expanding our relationships, as well as the United States and other Asian countries: Indonesia, Malaysia, Vietnam, Cambodia, Japan, Singapore. And I also believe that the strong, withstanding relationship between the US and Australia will continue to show strong benefits. And with that, I'm opening up to questions, and I guess I'll say goodbye. After that, I'll close it out.
All right, we got a question. John Sweeney, can you hear me? John, you should be on.
Yes, I can hear you. Can you hear me?
Yep, go ahead and ask your question.
All right, Pete, thanks for that. That was a very, very interesting presentation. The question I had was if you could expound a little more on what you just mentioned about the EU. I'm really curious what the future of the EU is in a post-Brexit, post-coronavirus world, and how those two events are going to possibly weaken the EU, and what effect that's going to have on the global economy.
I could talk about this all day. So, am I live? Can you hear me okay?
Yes, sir, you're good.
Yeah. So the European Union was already facing a lot of outside pressure because the United States saw it as an opportunity to, if you look at our current trade policy with regard to these trade wars, quote unquote, we like to press the advantage. When we see that there's an opening in any sort of economic weakness, we press the advantage. So if you were to talk to Peter Navarro, if you were to get in a room with Mnuchin, they would say to you that we went after China when we did because we knew that their economy was soft. Well, the European Union was already facing, Italian issues with debt. They saw a lot of problems with creeping unemployment in that part of the world. And many economists in the United States believe that the breakoff between the United Kingdom and the European Union is going to be a little rougher than they realize. So they pick now, of all times, to press the advantage to try to come up with an opening to reopen a renegotiation for something called TTIP, which was the US-European Free Trade Agreement. They wanted to do it on better terms, better American terms for a couple of industries. Then this happened. The economic devastation of this virus on Italy and Spain, you can't overstate it. I have an Italian passport. I'm an Italian citizen. I get emails and dispatches on the daily from people. The widespread suffering, the lack of hope, the lack of consumer confidence, it is emotionally devastating for me when I hear it from my friends and family. You add to that the lack of perceived financial support from one of the most important economies. That is important. And I hate to put it this way, but America will press the advantage. So, all this started with a argument over Airbus, and then it was platform taxes on things like Facebook and Netflix and such. You're going to see when the air clears and the president feels that he has China in the bag on a phase 2 agreement, a real serious pressing on the European Union, and probably a deep expansion and expectation that we get to the drawing board to renegotiate TTIP. But I believe that that will be a nastier, uglier argument and battle, because whoever is president will feel that we have less to lose than we do from a Chinese trade war.
We got another question from Mark Williams. Mark, you should be able to talk now. Did I lose Mark?
I feel like I'm on a radio talk show, and it's whenever they get, Mark from Braintree, you're on. Mark?
Yeah.
Can you hear me now?
There
Yes.
Did you hear me then? Did you hear my introduction, or we all, Pete, you missed that?
No, I missed it. Mark.
No, I love that microphone though. That does give the radio talk show look. I love that thing. My name is Mark Williams. Strategic Development Group is my company. It's a site selection company, a lot of work in South Carolina and around the country. If you look at the last 10 years, there's been a real growth in inland ports, particularly east of the Mississippi. Very interesting because they've been much closer to seaports than ever in the past. And South Carolina, interestingly, has really jumped on that model. They got Greer open. It's surpassed all expectations of production. Dillon is now open and growing rapidly. So my question to you is, the model of inland ports as it is or was corrected for supply chain changes you see evolving, maybe because of coronavirus or maybe just the passage of time. How has that justification and model changed in terms of how those inland ports are going to be utilized?
I don't think it has changed. I think that there will not be that much of a correction in the way that modern supply chains, with regards to ocean traffic, in particular rail traffic, we've already begun to build that new attitude toward distribution of rail traffic and intermodal traffic. I don't really see a change there. What does excite me is this idea of things like Hyperloop. It gets my juices flowing. I don't know if I'll see a real mass expansion of that in our lifetime. But no, I don't think there'll be any great change in that. I will say this though, man, the world you're in, that whole site selection and all that, if I could come back and change what I do for a living, the guys that do the credits and incentives work for the tax firms, that's like my dream job. I love that stuff.
Well, you're looking pretty young, so you just jump on back in.
Yeah, don't let this ruddy face fool you, man. I'm on the wrong side of 50, so there'll be none of that.
I understand. Thank you.
Thank you.
Mark, thank you. Are there any other questions? I got a question for you. You mentioned that the economy is going to recover almost as quickly as it fell apart.
Well, let me, okay. I said it's going to be like a wine hangover, though. And I don't know if anyone else, you've never had a wine hangover?
No, I've never.
Do you just like guzzle Bud Light in your garage, or are you a teetotaler like most of my family in Texas?
I hear there's a bad hit.
Yeah, it's not pleasant. I think that we're going to have a quick recovery in a lot of areas. It's most of our economic woes right now. What do markets like, right? Markets like to have certainty. We like to know where things are going. We like to have some comfort in where they're going to be. We have no certainty right now. And what I'm telling people to stop watching the news so much is we shouldn't let the S&P index be the guideline for whether or not we think the economy is going in the right direction, or the price of oil, which, by the way, that whole Russia, Saudi Arabia thing, When people can go out again, when people can leave their homes again, a lot of these jobs are waiting for them. They're waiting for them, and they can't wait to bring them back. Will people leave their homes again as quickly as they ran into them? Will we be as likely to head to Home Depot when the sun comes out to go and do our planting? Will we be as excited to go to a restaurant? Are we going to feel comfortable? Personally, I can't wait to go have breakfast, as an example. Like, I can't wait to go to my breakfast place. Am I going to be as comfortable with my daughter going out to breakfast, sitting 2 feet away from the person at the table next to me? Am I going to be comfortable going to a movie again, which is one of my favorite things to do, having people, strangers sitting all around me? I fly normally 6-7 times a week.
Right.
Is that going to be my new normal? Or is it going to be like 9/11, but longer, where there are certain aspects of our economy that are just going to take longer for us to adopt again? And that's where that whole wine hangover attitude, I think, comes from. It's going to be a kind of a hazy feeling for a little while, and it may take a bit. But the fundamentals of our economy were just fantastic. And this whole, innovation economy, I can't stress enough the things I see, the amazing things I see people making in this country. The aerospace side of it, the genetic medicines. If you didn't believe in America and our medical scientific community, and this didn't make you believe in it, I don't know what it would take to make you believe in it. Genetic therapies, it's positively incredible.
So a lot of the folks on the, and by the way, we're at 112 attendees. Thank you all for participating. A lot of folks on this call are local economic developers or regional economic developers or state developers. What advice do you have for them regarding what do they need to be doing right now to be ready for when things turn?
There's two parts of it. So the first part is, everybody knows that the best time to be engaged in building infrastructure is in a downturn of the economy. I just don't know how long this one's going to be. So I think this is probably a good time to be engaged. Second of all, understand liquidity, understand where you have more than two, understand where you have opportunities to be better with your cash situation. And third, if you are not directly engaged with tax professionals right now, if you are not directly engaged with people who can help you with the Small Business Administration, being engaged with your local tax authorities for state, municipal, if you're not working from a standpoint of understanding federal, you're crazy. You're about to have, $2.1 trillion worth of money pumped into the economy, probably another $2 trillion worth of stimulus bill for infrastructure, and likely another $1 to $2 trillion after that of financial stimulus. If you're not directly working with people to help you get some of that money into your business, or to help your clients get some of that money to help them with their business, you're doing a disservice to the people that depend on you. So talk to your accountants, talk to your attorneys, and get with people that can help you to access that liquidity.
I want to thank you for committing to do this in the first place. You were coming down to Hilton Head to be with us. This man charged us nothing. The only thing we were covering was his airfare. We're very grateful for your time, and thank you for doing this.
Oh, anytime, man. If anybody needs me, I think I put my contact information up. I'm happy to help, and I'm just hanging around. So give me a call if I can help with anything.
Yeah, you got it. I've got my chairman coming up real quick. I did want to say a few things before Bob closes this out. Our team has been trying to reach out to the economic development community across the state on a very consistent basis. If there's things happening in your backyard with employers that are either pausing operations or they are, in some cases, hiring and retooling to meet the needs of our state right now, please make sure our team knows, and make sure your local cooperative knows. we're trying to keep tabs on all of that. And same, if we hear something on our end, we'll make sure that you know. For the economic development community, what can you be doing right now to stay in the game? If your community has an economic development strategy, my advice would be stick to the plan, keep working your plan, even if it's at home from your desk, keep working your strategy. That's what we're doing. If you don't have a strategy, talk to us. We have grants where we participate, and we've done it with many of you on this call. We'll help participate financially in getting your strategy constructed. But I would argue that there's no more important time in our profession for the economic development community to be conveners of your business folks, your political folks, your elected officials, and ensuring that not only do you have a strategy for how to handle what's happening right now, that you have a strategy for where you're going to go when this is all over, and so you can hit the ground running. You need to keep working on sites. I think sites that are market ready are going to be winners. So if you own it, you have infrastructure to it, the site is ready to go, those are the sites that are going to stay in the game when everything picks back up. And our team will tell you that we're seeing projects right now, even while this is all going on, there's still project activity. And the last thing is that you really need to know your labor market, especially now. So many displaced workers, especially from the service industry, that in markets like Charleston region and the Greenville region that were considered underemployed, but they're not going to leave the service industry, maybe rethinking their strategy now. So how do you funnel them into the needs of your employers? So with that, we've got in 2 weeks from now on Thursday, we have a program with Mark Williams and Jamie Frost from our team, along with Keith Avery, who's the CEO of Newberry Electric Cooperative. I think my yard man just showed up outside. I can hear his blower. I apologize. So I'm going to mute as soon as I stop. I'm going to mute and let Bob talk. They're going to be doing a program on readiness, on site readiness. Our organization, our cooperatives have invested over $42 million in the last 6 years in helping get sites developed. And they're committed to continue doing that. So we want to be your partner in all of that. I think that was the last thing I was going to say. So, Mr. Chairman, if you don't mind closing us out.
Not a bit. Can you hear me okay? James, thank you and your team for pulling this together. I think it was a wonderful idea. Peter, thank you so much. I have been in my own little world here at Mid Carolina Electric Cooperative trying to make sure we keep the lights on and we keep safe, and I have not thought about the world. So what you shared was very enlightening about what's going on around the globe, and I know that everybody got a lot out of that presentation. Just keep preaching it. James, keep doing what you're doing, and if we can help, the cooperatives can help in any way, just reach out to us. There's three things you talked about: investors, which of course for us is our members, and from a member's perspective, the only thing that Mid Carolina's members can't do is walk in our office. They can do everything else they have always traditionally done. As far as having a plan in place, we kind of look at this as an extreme storm. So we've kind of had a plan in place. We just, of course, had to modify things. Again, talking about your customers, which are our members, they are shopping differently with the way they interact with us. And boards of directors, just like this call right here with James, we have been in constant contact with our boards of directors that run our businesses. And again, those were great pieces of information that you brought forth, Peter, and thank you for doing this. And James, thank you again for you and your team and the 112 participants on the call. Invite your friends. James, get as many people on this as we can in the future, and we look forward to Mr. Avery and hosting that panel in 2 weeks. So with that being said, I appreciate the time.
Thank you, boss. Pete, thank you, man. Appreciate
My pleasure. Anytime at all.
Signing off. Thank you all.
Thanks, everybody. Take care.